Hello, and welcome to Enlightened Empaths, your community for the spiritually awakened. Today, we are so excited because Michelle Belanger is joining us to discuss dreamwalking and psychic vampires. You guys probably already know Michelle and have seen her on TV. She's a highly regarded intuitive medium and expert on occult matters who's written over 30 books on topics ranging from demons, ghosts, and dream work to vampires, occult ritual, and psychic energy. She's been on numerous TV shows like Paranormal State, Monster Quest, Paranormal Lockdown, and Portals to Hell. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so excited. We wanted to start off our conversation today by talking about this concept of being a psychic vampire. I think for me anyway, you're the first person I know to write and speak so much about being a psychic vampire. And I just wonder if you could tell people, when did you realize you were one, and kind of what does that look like?
So I hit on the fact that there was a vampiric quality to my psychic abilities pretty early on. And I think I credit that to growing up in a family where psychic was something that like several people were. So it was okay to talk about. It was an okay thing to sort of like explore. And it wasn't until my first year of college that I ran across a book that actually described this under the term psychic vampire. Because, for like my early teen years and like up until like 18 or so, I was like, I think I'm a vampire, but like I don't sleep in a coffin. I'm not undead. This seems really weird. I think it's with this energy thing. And this was long ago enough that we were still trying to work out that psychic energy existed. Like Reiki was just starting to really catch on. And I was in the Midwest where, if you did yoga, most of your school teachers were sure that you were worshiping Satan. So the book was Dion Fortune's Psychic Self-Defense. And it was a game changer for me on a couple of levels. The first one being, it was the first time I saw someone describe what I experienced. But the downside was she had only ever experienced interactions with someone like me in a predatory state where they were dominant over her, where they were preying upon her against her will, where it was framed as an attack. And definitely what she's recounting were the bad sort of psychic vampire. But to see the word in print is what I hit on. And it inspired the first book that I published through Wiser, the Psychic Vampire Codex, because I knew from my own experiences that not everyone had to be a predator who had these abilities, that it was sort of, well, let me define what a psychic vampire is to kind of go from there. So a psychic vampire is somebody who needs to regularly and actively take human vital energy in order to maintain their mental, physical, spiritual well-being. And that vital energy, we can call it prana or chi, psychic energy, whatever you want to call it. It's that life force that flows between all of us that folks in healing modalities make use of, harnessing and directing. As I was coming to understand this ability in myself, like this characteristic, what was really clear is it was sort of a proactive self-healing. I was born with a heart defect, so I was a pretty sickly child. And the times at which I would take energy from people when I was much, much younger was usually when I was compensating. And it follows the same mechanics of Reiki attunement, just in reverse. Often, hands on a person, it can be done at a distance. It is a focus on that life energy. And instead of putting it into someone, it is taking it out. And that's not necessarily 100% a bad thing if it's done right. But, and I will agree with Dion Fortune in this, if it's done against somebody's will, without their knowledge or consent, it is always a bad thing. Although I would also argue that healing someone against their will without their knowledge or consent, like doing anything to their energy without their consent, is bad and is going to have a negative result for everybody.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You always have to get permission. I want to ask what this feels like, because sometimes I'll be around someone and I'll think, oh, I feel so good when I'm around this person. They always lift me up. Is that me taking their energy? How?
Well, that's sort of the trick is everybody is engaged in energy exchange in all cases at all times. Like it's part of who we are and how we interface with one another and with the world. Whenever we have like a deep breathe in the energy of the forest, like we both give and take. And in most cases, when we're healthy, when the space that we're with is healthy, when the people we're with are healthy, there's a balance to that. And often a synergy where the act of giving or taking, like there isn't a deficit on either part. In the case of folks that I would identify specifically as psychic vampires, people who have a vampiric quality, there's something that breaks down in either how they process energy, how they access it, or how they integrate it into their own system once it's taken, that doesn't work quite right. The way that I'll usually suggest to think about that is, everybody can eat food, but some people have food allergies and some people don't have like the same kind of absorption due to various things. So they may need to take supplements and may need to eat different ways. And so although we are all hardwired to both give and take energy and to engage in an exchange of energy with pretty much everything in our environment, not just people, folks who are vampiric have some need to take more in a way that is noticeable and typically from other people. So my theory on it, and I'm not alone in the theory, but there are multiple theories for what causes this, is I think that there's a breakdown in how vampiric people process their energy, the types of energy that they're able to connect to. For example, I've spent a lot of time studying multiple energetic systems. I'm a Reiki 3, I've had training in Qigong, Hands of Light and other things. And one thing that I can say is I can sense the energy in the natural world, and I can sense and harness to heal other people, to direct it and shunt it. But I cannot necessarily take that in and do anything with it myself. Like I can go out into the natural world and be like, I can feel this, but it doesn't sustain me in a way that is clearly something that breaks down. Like something isn't working right. And it's not really fixable. It's part of my base nature. But taking it kind of pre-digested from other people fixes the problem. How to do that responsibly is to find people who have an abundance of energy, almost too much energy. And instead of just taking from someone, you make it a healing exchange where you take their excess, where you share, and where it is an upgiving. Now, there are a lot of instances, and Dion Fortune pretty eloquently described them, where there are folks who don't realize that they have this capacity, and they just find predatory and toxic ways of relating to people in order to get what they need without fully understanding what they're doing or why. And that's where most of our ideas of energy vampires and predatory psychic vampires comes from. People who don't really quite understand the harm that they're doing because they haven't spent a lot of time understanding any of their relationship with energy.
That's so fascinating. So like if I go to the beach and swim in the ocean, I feel renewed and refreshed. Am I hearing you right that if you went to that same beach and swam in the ocean, you wouldn't hold on to that refreshed feeling?
A lot of that stuff doesn't stick or actively doesn't seem to be good for my system. There's a breakdown in the way that I relate to certain types of energy.
But if I'm doing healing or connection, because it's all vibration and frequency, we all know that. So if you're doing Hands of Light or Reiki, do you still act as a conduit to bring that energy into yourself to send to someone else? So are you filling your coffers at the same time? So it kind of negates the need for the vampiric kind of exchange?
Well, I got Reiki 3 because I was trying to figure out if that would be the case. And what I've found with Reiki, and it's really funny working with other Reiki practitioners because they're like, no, it can't be that way. Where I can tap into the universal source that every Reiki practitioner is trained and like attuned to. And I can kind of act as a conduit, but it's sort of like grabbing it outside of myself and directing it. It skips me. Like it skips my essential bit. It doesn't really integrate with my stuff at all. It's fascinating to watch the look on somebody's face where I'm like, no, really, this is sort of like how this works. And they'll try to give me Reiki, and it kind of bounces back in a way that is very unusual. And I'm not the only person for whom Reiki energy just doesn't click. And I know that goes against most of what we understand about like what Reiki is and how it works, and how vibrations and frequencies work. And I don't know that I could describe like the full on like metaphysical or quantum reality that means that certain people just don't match that vibration or can't. But I will say that I'm not the only person. I don't think that I'm revealing anything that she hasn't talked about like widely on social media. There's an author, Laurel K. Hamilton, and we bonded over the fact that she's also an energy worker and a practitioner of magic. And she has to tell her fans who are energy workers to never try to send her healing energy at a distance, especially not Reiki, because it just does not agree with her system. It's a fascinating weirdness. So I can grab it and I can direct it to somebody else, as long as I'm keeping it away from the core of me.
Fascinating.
Yeah, no, I've spent a lot of time going like, but why? I mean, I've got ideas and theories. I've worked with some people who don't seem like they're native to this space. They're not from around here. And so their energetic systems act very differently and function off of some very different rules, or at least interact with energies in a very different way. I will go out on a limb and say that some people who are not necessarily originally attuned to Earth or comfortably attuned to Earth are some of the more likely people to have these vampiric qualities.
Do you think that's what makes you such an effective medium? I mean, do you think it enhances it in a way that you're just a messenger, like the information just comes from the other side and you're just channeling it? Well, you're not really channeling it, are you? Because it's not being absorbed into you.
I'm relaying it. That's fascinating, because that's how I convey messages. I hadn't considered that. And that is a wonderful, brilliant insight. When I'm communicating with spirits, I do not let them in me. It feels like there's no room in me, and that it would not be comfortable either for me or for them. There has been exactly one instance where I've allowed someone into me, and it was a friend who passed, and I did it for his faith community and his wife. And it was quite an experience. It was a lot. It took a lot to actually be able to do that. But when I'm communicating with spirits under ordinary circumstances, they're near me and they relay what they're saying, and I pass that along. But it does sort of have that same sort of jumping the circuit feel that Reiki and a number of the other energy healing modalities have, where I can grab it and I can sense it and I can give it, I pass it along, but it skips me.
That is so interesting, because I've watched you work, and one thing I've noticed about I just love the way you connect with spirit and the way you get such accurate information. And for me, when I'm doing mediumship, everything has to go through me. So it has to be filtered through my biases, my perception. And then, sometimes it's lost in translation. Whereas when I've seen you work, nothing seems to be lost in translation. And I'm wondering if that's part of it.
I'd never thought of it that way, but yeah, I definitely, because I'll describe it as like, I've got my detached observer, and I'm the detached observer. Like there's a level of objectivity, because I'm witnessing what's going on. I'm bearing witness to it, but I'm not immersed in it personally. Like there is a sense of detachment. That's pretty cool. No, like this is, I hadn't thought of it that way and hadn't looked at it that way, because I've sort of approached the psychic medium work that I do as one thing. I mean, they're interconnected. Like there's no way to separate a sensitivity to energy and spirits from the psychic anything. And, I use the term psychic vampire to make it very clear to people that this is a part of my psychic reality. But I haven't examined the effects of both of them. And that's sort of like jumping the circuit. I will have to really think about that. That is a fascinating, this is exciting.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I mean, I've been doing this for freaking decades at this point. So like new insight is awesome.
Well, yay. When I've seen you do work, you do work with a lot of hostile energy, at least on your TV shows, with Ghost and the D word and all sorts of negative stuff. Do they take your energy? How does that work when you're encountering negative stuff?
They don't. I think one of the reasons why I'm uniquely suited to that work is I bite back. Like I know it can be sort of like a silly joke, but I operate on a level where if something's trying to take my energy, I can reach back out and do the exact same thing to it. And most spirits that are negative are so accustomed to not being met on that level that, like schoolyard bullies, the minute you stand up to them, they go running with their little tails tucked between their legs. It's also why I will frequently get called in on like really dark, really violent cases, because behind the scenes, I'm usually kicking the stuff out. I really resent anything that preys upon vulnerable, innocent, or otherwise helpless people who might not be able to protect themselves, who might be in a vulnerable frame of mind where maybe they could take care of themselves under other circumstances, but in this one they can't. Children, the unwary, and there is a profound protective streak. And I'm uniquely suited to go in guns blazing and not be hit or affected in quite the same way that others do. I've described myself as empathic because in the process of reaching out to connecting and sampling the energies of people and spirits and places, I can identify the emotions, like the layers of scent in a perfume, but I also am not feeling those in myself in the same way that I've heard other people describe it. There's again that sense of a jumping the circuit, like a detachment, where some parts of me can't be touched by those types of energies, or is just out of sync enough with that stuff that like we don't quite connect. And I hadn't really considered that might also come back to how I do not connect easily or readily on a personal level to a lot of energies other than the energy of other living people that I actively take it from.
Wow. Yeah, because whenever I've encountered negative energy, I feel slimed, like from the Ghostbusters.
Mm-hmm.
And I watch you and I've read so many of your books. You're fearless. And I take a lot of comfort and confidence in that. Like I've learned a lot from that. Like, don't be afraid, because they are just basically bullies.
Yeah, no, the fear definitely is something that they're looking for, and it does give them an in. But I've watched enough other people to know that like there's just different ways in which each of us engage with energy and with spirit. And that means that each of us have different strengths and weaknesses. And weaknesses aren't necessarily like bad, and they aren't necessarily our fault. It's just understanding like in this situation, I am the best tool for this job. And in this situation, I probably shouldn't be doing this. I will say that something about my energy tends to be very big and very intimidating. So when we're talking the more shy and retiring and meeker spirits, like little children spirits, or just like lost and sad people or whatever, I'm not the best person for that job, because I usually have to spend 30 minutes of my time going, no, be not afraid. It's okay. I'm not here to, I'm really, I know I look scary. It's okay. Like I just want to talk. Like I have to kind of like actively try to make myself smaller, and just sort of like, it's a sense of almost like tucking in parts of myself and being like, it's fine. Like really, I might look like a big scary giant, but I just want to hear what your story was.
Yeah, just recognizing your strengths and weaknesses without that judgment and bias. I love it.
You made a really good point, Michelle, that you have a very warrior, like a psychic warrior type energy. So that would make sense that you would gravitate towards this stronger work that a lot of us that are empathic might have a hard time facing, or might be, I don't like to say too sensitive, because that's making it a negative connotation. I read, your home and all the work you do in the house where you the haunted house. And I live in a very old house in New England, and I grew up in one of the oldest cities in the country. So I know that energy, and it's ancient, and it's old, and it's deep, and how buildings hold whoever's been there. But I also think it's important about because so many people are heightened right now, whether it's positive, negative, or not. What are some ways that, and even through, we've become so digital, how can empaths or people, because the blunt version is what you're talking about scares some people. It really like, oh my God, are they going to come and get me? So
and I'm not offended by that, because there's a reason to be scared of the ones who either don't know what they're doing, or worse, are the ones who do understand this capacity and use it for selfish gain. Because, and I will not deny, there are definitely folks out there who either have this as an inborn ability or who have learned it, because I think it's very important to mention anyone can learn to take energy. Anyone. If you
Right.
can learn to give energy, if you can learn to connect to universal life energy to heal, you can learn to use all of those psychic gifts to prey on and hurt people. And the only difference is, are you that kind of a person?
Mhm.
And are you willing to kind of wallow in what that feels like? Because there's a cost to it that maybe they don't see at first, but it definitely, it changes the way you feel and the way you look and the way other people can perceive you.
But it also is, you found your connection with spirit, with all that is, with the different realms. Some people may use their mediumistic techniques to tap into the emotions of the people in spirit, or they might connect with those gentler energies, but your work isn't. Your work is much stronger than that, which is very, very needed during these times of shift and transition.
I mean, the world definitely needs frontline soldiers.
Yes.
And I've always had a belief, a long-standing, multiple lifetime belief, that you never ask someone to do a job that they are not suited to. And if there's no other choice than to do a job that you're not suited to, the cost is always going to be higher. The wounds that we will have inflicted upon us just by the emotional toll, just by the emotional labor, if we're not suited to that work, if we don't have the right type of emotional or spiritual armor, we might be able to do it and it can wreck us. So how do we survive and navigate this time right now where the collective unconscious is a roiling, boiling ocean of hate and unrest and fear and uncertainty and just all of the looming terror of what's coming from so many different directions? I mean, it's a tall order, right? The first thing I would say is to be aware of how interconnected we all are, and how that is both a great strength, but also can be a great, not a weakness, but an Achilles heel. Like, if we don't sometimes take time to detach, to remind ourselves of where our personal boundaries are, to take some time to find our center and to be a little selfish about that, to not try to give our energy to heal everything all the time without also making sure that we are in a solid space, in a safe space, centered and sheltered and able to heal ourselves. We can't fix or heal anything. I think that's one of the most troublesome issues anybody who's like an empath or a natural healer faces, is there's this impulse. You feel the pain, you see the pain, and so you want to fix it. You want to reach out and heal it. You know that that's your calling. You know that you've got the tools to do it. And it's so easy to give all of yourself away to the point where now you have nothing left.
I think a lot of people need to hear that, who are listening to this show, that it's okay to practice sacred selfishness.
I think the easier way to frame it for people is you can't put anyone else out if you yourself are on fire. We're all on fire, but you have to put yourself out first. Like, you have to attend to your own stuff. And that's not selfishness, that's practical. You increase vastly the amount of good that you do if you take care of yourself and make sure that you are healthy and safe and strong, because then you can do the work. If you're doing so much about giving yourself away and just being overwhelmed by it and then allowing it to like pull you apart, now all of those gifts that you have are stretched out across the vastness of suffering. It doesn't get as much done. It just doesn't. And you suffer in the process.
Yeah. And when you suffer, everything else around you suffers.
Yes, we're all interconnected. There are very few things that I will say I believe this 100%, but everything in my experiences, everything in my studies tells me there is this vast and glimmering webwork of energy strung between you and me, the earth and the stars, every living thing, everything that we don't even think of as living, spirit, all of it as like this wide neural net. And what I think and what I feel vibrates down those lines. And even if we're not consciously trying to tap into that, we still hear it like background noise. And like background noise, if it's loud, if it's jangling, if it's discordant, it affects us. Even if we're not actively taking it in, it affects us. So as we heal ourselves, we are healing an essential part of that whole and that healing, that positivity stretches out across the web work just as much as our woundedness does.
I wanted to move forward a little bit into your work on psychic dream walking. I find that just absolutely fascinating so I've talked a lot on this show and my other podcast, Psychic Teachers, about something I call being a night worker, where I have a lot of dreams where I'm helping people in the dream state. Like I'll be giving readings or crossing ghost over or offering healings. And since I started talking about it on the show, so many listeners have been emailing us saying, oh, I do that too. I do that too. So I picked up your book, and what you're describing is similar and different. Can you tell people what you mean by psychic dream walking?
So psychic dream walking is where lucid dreaming and astral travel or out of body experience intersect. And it is adjacent to what you're talking about. It's one way of getting to those places where you reach out and communicate with other people. So I was introduced to the idea of psychic dream walking as that term in fourth grade by another fourth grader. And
Pearl.
I truly believe that she was a walk-in. There's a lot of things that I left unspoken about some of the things that went between us, and specifically what she talked about in terms of some of the things that she was instructing me in. Because it's honestly, especially when I wrote that book, I didn't think anybody was ready for it. Maybe soon, but there was a lot of weirdness with Pearl. And what we worked on doing was going into light trance states. What I've learned is, the hypnagogic state, where you're in that sort of liminal space between waking and sleep, and you haven't quite surrendered to sleep yet. And the sort of descent into unconsciousness and the different parts of your mind that sleep and dream mean. We would harness that, or we would work on lucid dreaming, so becoming conscious in a dream, with the intent of using the dream space as our vehicle of communication, and either erecting a gateway or a doorway, or just walking down a road in this dream realm to reach and communicate with another person or a spirit with whom we had a connection or an interest. That early work, like I said, I'm 10 and I'm learning how to do this, and we're like checking on one another. One of my most vivid recollections was Pearl's best friend was homesick, and we were on a field trip, and Pearl wanted both of us to go check on her because she wanted to make sure she was actually okay at home, because I think that there was some reason to think that maybe she wasn't just sick because of family stuff. And so like just sitting there with my knees against the back of the ugly dark green leather of these bus seats, and like the springs kind of creaking underneath me, and trying to tune out the sound of the other kids on the bus and the feel of the bus, and just drift into that other space where I'm still in my body, I'm still present there, but I've gone inward to go outward. And it was different enough from everything that I read about astral travel that I started trying to figure out, like, what is this? Like, are there other cultures that write about this? Are there other systems that talk about it? I did a bunch of work in my undergrad stuff in my comparative religious studies degree on shamanism, because that came closest to some of the stuff that Pearl was teaching me, just clearly not from any particular culture. This idea of a dream space and a dream time, and a liminal realm that we can access through vision and altered states or dreams, where we can go. Actually, Joseph Campbell has a book with the title that always resonates with this: The Inner Reaches of Outer Space. That idea that you can go inward and discover everything out beyond you, that not all doors leading outward are the only ways to get elsewhere.
Do you believe that if our soul travels like that, can we travel into the past and the future?
I'm not sure, because I can't speak from my own experience on that. What I can say is this: because of who and what I am, I have committed to a very linear experience of things. Although I have a deep connection to the past and a lot of memories, I am here and moving forward. I do think that it's possible to access vision of possibilities and access the streams of reality. So we can travel back as an observer perhaps,
Mhm.
and travel forward as an observer, but not necessarily a participant.
I agree with that. In that book, you tell a fascinating story about your next door neighbor and dream walking kind of accidentally into his dream, and
Yeah.
he came over to your apartment. Can you share that story?
This was my lesson of do not ever judge a book by their cover. My next door neighbor was a roofer. And, we lived in a town which is lovingly referred to as Bruns Tucky. It's kind of the home of the NASCAR dads. And Ron was, baseball cap, flannel wearing, just not anyone that I was prepared to think had anything to do with energy work or psychicism or anything like that. We would go over and play GoldenEye tournaments on his computer system. Like we'd game together, and that was about like where we bonded. So I was really taken aback because so I was doing dream walking was something that, having learned with Pearl, I could do it consciously. But something that I also learned is people do this unconsciously all the time. Death announcing dreams and dreams that people have where there's telepathic communication or even what feels like direct person to person communication. These are some of the most commonly reported and recorded paranormal experiences in the literature all the way back. So this is, in my opinion, an inherent human capacity that we all share. Most of us do it unconsciously. Well, what I will say is in learning to do it consciously, that does open a door to the ability so that you will spontaneously do it if you need to. If someone is calling to you from a distance, whether it's a friend or a family member in distress or crisis, or someone that you've never met in this life with whom you nevertheless have a connection, or if you yourself have a need and there's someone who can answer that, like you get pulled out. And I think that it's safe to say guided by other forces, whatever you want to name those forces as. And I was in a place where there was a lot of stress and there was a lot going on. And I spontaneously dream walked to Ron. And I remembered the dream. It was pretty vivid. We had an exchange. We interacted with one another. And I felt a little embarrassed by it because I wasn't sure how to broach the topic to this very, very salt of the earth, not someone I thought I could raise these conversations with. And of course, the punchline is when I finally sheepishly went over and I was like, hey, I don't know if you believe in psychic stuff or this or that or the other thing. And when Ron was just like, why didn't you just say you were a psychic vampire? Like, duh. Like he treated it like it was nothing. He's like, yeah, I remembered that. I wasn't going to say anything because I thought you didn't know. Oh.
That was so crazy. And he woke up with what he thought was like a hickey on his neck.
Yeah, he woke up with, I should say also, I dream walked to him because I needed energy and I fed off of him in the dream walk. And so dream walking, one of the reasons that I wanted to really understand it was also some way that sometimes that vampiric side of me would be expressed. And it was one of the few places where I didn't always have conscious control over it if I got really, really low. And so it really behooved me to sort out how does this work? How do I control it? What are the boundaries? What are the limits? And how do I protect people who, like my neighbor, with whom I've had a connection, but we haven't had this conversation. We haven't had any kind of consenting anything. I felt pretty bad about having that happen. And yeah, there was a physical mark.
But he was pretty cool about it, which I loved.
He was fine. I would have preferred it to have not happened that way. We became much closer because of it. I actually was the officiant at his marriage many years later. Yeah, no, pretty cool guy. And we bonded over it. But at the time I was like, so this is a weird thing to talk about. And I just want you to know if that happens again and you're conscious of it, you can tell me to just shoo. And I probably will.
I love that story.
Well, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are wondering, am I a psychic vampire? What would be either some characteristics or some tendencies or some things people could identify in themselves to see if they're doing their work from this perspective?
The first thing I will say is it's really easy to mix up empath and vampire. And I would argue that they are two sides of the same coin. They are intertwined abilities. Where an empath may feel like they're taking energy in from the world around them, I feel that it is a different mechanic, that they are like a string on a violin that is tuned so perfectly that when music plays in the room, when there's another note not from that instrument, they will vibrate with it anyway. Whereas a psychic vampire, there is an active process of taking that energy in and processing it and making it a part of yourself. So how do you tell? How do you feel once you have not been around people for an extensive period of time? When the world went into lockdown, there were a lot of folks who ended up reaching out to me, trying to figure out what to do about suddenly finding themselves isolated without any kind of human contact. Now, the caveat is, again, we all exchange energy to some extent. And so it's not unusual if you suddenly find yourself completely isolated to start to feel run down and to start to feel the lack of that interconnectedness, that sort of like natural cycling that we all do. But there's a degree of it. For someone to be what I define as vampiric, it's not just that you feel a little disconnected or a little run down. It starts to have a qualitative impact on your health. You get sick, your immune system tanks. You get anything that you were sensitive to before, you get even more sensitive to. If you have underlying issues, autoimmune issues, chronic issues, those start to like really creep up and snowball in a way that is notably different than when you are regularly engaging and getting energy from people. And I don't want to encourage people to assume that all their chronic conditions are just an energy deficient. The important thing is like, make sure that you get that squared away as, here's how I treat this from a traditional medicine standpoint. And what I'm saying is, even all of the traditional medicine approaches, like your medications, your doctor stuff, when they're scratching their head and they can't figure out why it's still getting worse. And the only solution is you sit down and you do an energy exchange with someone, you get some energy from someone, and that fixes it. That's pretty good indication that there's something vampiric going on.
Okay, so a follow-up question on that is, if I'm doing readings, a lot of readings for people, and it either raises my vibration and I feel jazzed up and energetic and so in the zone, I'm still using my empathic qualities to tap into their auric field and to tap into the energy of spirit. But then there are some people that I'll interact with where I'll finish a call or sitting or a Zoom experience and I'll feel completely drained. So have they possibly used vampiric influence on my energy, or is it just the exchange?
There's a couple of things that can be going on with that. Sometimes people are just in such a bad place that they do need a little bit more. But there are certainly people who are naturally vampiric. So the third option, because I've definitely also seen this, is sometimes our energy just doesn't gel with another person. And it's not that one side took or gained, but the actual like act of connecting, something broke down and cost too much on both ends. And I don't know how best to describe that.
That makes perfect sense, because that goes back to the vibration and frequency. And if our frequencies match, it's going to be much easier to make that connection and keep it in that symbiotic place. Whereas if there's more of a fluctuation in the wavelengths of what we're putting out or receiving, it's going to be harder to maintain that connection.
Yeah, when it's discordant, especially, I've seen it almost do damage to people on either end, where you're trying to connect and you're both operating on frequencies that are so different that it's just jangling and wrong and kind of bounces back in a way that is uncomfortable. Again, it goes back to that idea that like sometimes we're just not the right tool for the job. When I do energy work and readings on people, it's one of the reasons I don't do readings for hire, is sometimes my energy just does not gel with another person. Mm-hmm. And it's not a matter of taking or giving. It's just to even try to connect is going to cost so much that both of us are going to come away feeling terrible.
That's where I'm going with this. So do you feel that when you're energetically connecting with someone to raise your energetic level, do they have an impact? Do they get a physical reaction or a psychic reaction, or are they even aware of it?
Oh, absolutely aware of it. And there's definitely a reaction and a synergy. When I'm taking energy from someone and I do it with their knowledge and their consent, it is a consensual exchange. And this is why I say it's not necessarily a bad or a negative ability. When it is done right, it actually encourages that person's system to yield up stuff that has gotten stagnant or maybe overwhelming. And then there is this, after a kind of dip in their sense of their energy, where they are deeply relaxed, where it's sort of like that like wrap yourself up in a blanket and kind of doze on the couch, like comfortable relaxation.
Mhm.
After a period of recuperation, their energy comes back brighter and clearer and cleaner. And I hope it doesn't sound bad, but I've related it to, I do a little bit of herbalism. If you pinch little bits off of like your lavender or oregano and just harvest small amounts, it has the effect of not damaging the plant, but actually encouraging the plant to grow even more vivaciously. And that's the effect that I've seen when a vampiric exchange is done properly. With the knowledge and consent of the person, you skim off the surface. You take the stuff that they don't really need anymore or that has gotten gunked up in their system. And the one thing that I've definitely seen with folks who are naturally vampiric is they have an ability to process that, the negative stuff, the heavy stuff, hard emotions, and chew through it in a way that might be detrimental for somebody else to hold on to.
What does that conversation sound like when you're asking to take someone's energy? I'm just curious.
The hard part is first having the conversation of, does this person believe in energy at all? Because I won't work with someone who doesn't have at least some background, because I could describe, until I'm blue in the face,